everyone. I'm glad to see that everyone's here bright and early. Didn't have too much fun last night, so that's perfect because I'm about to talk about accounting technology. Just kidding. So let's go back just for a second. So this is a map, and you're probably thinking, what does a map have to do with blockchain? And so I'm going to tell a little story. When I was 16 years old, I was invited to study with some professors at Oxford University. It was an opportunity I couldn't refuse, and so I packed my bags. My parents brought me to the airport and dropped me off. Now, at this time, obviously, I didn't have a mobile phone. I didn't have GPS. And so I was just on my own trying to find my way there. And so ultimately, I made it, not without some mishaps. So let's fast forward 10 years later. Where are we? We go back. And I moved to San Francisco just 10 years later, and I'm starting my third company. And on the first day that I get there, I have a meeting. And so how do I get there? Uber, of course, and it goes off without a hitch. So what happened in between just those short 10 years? So if we look in the late 90s, the early 2000s, companies were working on navigation tools. So they thought they were building a better map, right? Wrong. So 2005, enter Google Maps. And so what they were doing was entirely different. They weren't just building a better map. They weren't just building navigation tools. What they were building was a system for location data. And what they did that was really interesting with this information is that they shared it with people. They let people build on top of that. And you know what that enabled? Created ride sharing. It created location-based home sharing, location-based reviews, dating, food delivery, of course. So in short, a simple map and a new way of looking at a map created an entirely new economic system. And this has been one of the dominant economic systems of the past decade, as we've seen with the recent IPOs. And almost every aspect of our lives changed. And so how did we go from this map, and how did I go from this map to this app? Was it better technology? Did Google just simply have a better map? Not exactly. It was an evolution in thought. It's a shift in mindset. And this is why I'm so excited about blockchain and to share it with you today, because I'm not here to talk about just another accounting tool or another way to make your businesses more efficient. I'm here to talk to you about an evolution in the way that you do business, an evolution in the way that we think of business models altogether. Blockchain is not just a technology, it's an ideology. So today we'll go quickly through the evolution of our operating systems, and this is not just the way that we do things, but the way that we think about our society. And so we'll quickly start in the past and present, but really what I want to get to is to help us envision what the future might look like in a decentralized landscape. The future for our businesses, for our finances, for our governance, and for our daily lives. So what do I mean by operating system? Am I talking about Linux, computers? And yes, of course we have operating systems in respects to computing, but we also have them in nature. We have them in society. Our governments, our religions, our banks, our social norms and mores, those are all operating systems. And the way that we can think about it is it's a mechanism for exchange, for the way that we interact with each other in life and in business. So first, let's look at the operating system of the past. In the past, trust was based and rooted in community. So in this circumstance, let's say I live in this village, this local community, I might know this woman, and I might know the sheep that she raises. I might know where she sources the dye. And so therefore, I'm trusting her as an individual. Therefore, exchange was rooted in local community. I knew the person I was exchanging goods and services with. It had often immediate value. But obviously, there were problems with this operating system. It was extremely limited. It was more expensive. It was inefficient, and it was smaller in scale. And so naturally, we evolved. We went from a village to a connected village to a globally networked village. And so naturally, our operating system changed. And it brought us to the operating system of the present. Today, we have vast supply chain networks. We have global economies of scale. And so therefore, we place our trust in institutions, in banks, in brands, in governments, and that is great. We also, our communication and exchange is on a global scale. We trust the markets. We trust the economy. And so with such a global and complex system, we need to hire checkers, people to check this system for errors. And then we need people to double check those checkers and have auditors, and then more checkers to double check the checkers that they properly check these checkers. And it gets crazy, right? So we're still playing checkers to make a joke. We're not playing chess. We're not automating. We're not being smart about it. And so why are we having these problems? Well, first of all, our present operating system is centralized. This is the paramount to some of our challenges. What does that mean? Anything from our finances to our data to what we buy, what we eat, and what we even know is centralized. And so when you have all of these things and systems that are centralized, there are numerous single points of failure. As we all know, there have been data breaches and hacks for many of our biggest institutions, and that's problematic. What else? Our present operating system is opaque. So when you order a part from an upstream supplier, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. You trust that it is. You might trust an audit, but you don't know for sure. We also trust our data with institutions, and we trust that people are not doing anything nefarious with it. And so what else happens? Our present operating system is siloed. We're still rooted in business models of the past. And so we have these silos of governments, of companies, and of individuals where we are all very separated. And so we have these very complex point-to-point integrations. So this leads to a situation where we're reactive. We're often the last to know about what's going on with our own data, with our own products, because it's increasingly more complex. And so therefore, we need regulations and we need third-party bodies to enforce all of these things. So in other words, we trust the systems, we trust our systems, but only kind of. So I'll tell a story. I'll go back to San Francisco the same day that I had actually moved there. And I lived in one of these new buildings, one of the few that they actually allow to be built in San Francisco, if you've ever been there. And it had NFC keycard access. And so in the fury of moving in, I was starting a company, I was super busy, didn't have time to unpack. I just had boxes everywhere. So I get home after my first day of work, and there's a knock on my door, and it's a police officer. He says, "Ma'am, are you missing anything?" And I'm like, "Take a look. I don't know. It's all in boxes." And so later that night, I looked through everything, and I realized I was missing my passport, my checks, my credit cards that were sitting around, and jewelry. And so obviously I'm furious. And I go down to the leasing office in the building, and I knock on the door. I say, "Can I have the access records to my apartment?" And they're like, "No." So it was in that moment when I realized I really didn't have much power over my own information. I needed to get a warrant just to get the records to my apartment. And so it was then it clicked that I was building this blockchain company, and I finally understood the problems that I was solving. And those problems were that the world that we inhabit today, in business and in life, it's largely disempowering. And we lack access and knowledge and control, but ultimately we lack trust. And so this isn't a talk about what we're lacking. This is a talk about abundance, of course, and exponential tech. So I'm here to help share my story of how I moved from a mindset from lacking, from abundance, and from unlocking value, and unlocking new economies. And that's where blockchain comes in, because blockchain and decentralization in general represents the operating system of the future. This is a decentralized future, and it's a totally new way of looking at things. And so let's ask a quick question. Who in the room has heard of blockchain? Raise of hands. That's pretty good. Who is working in their businesses on piloting or using a blockchain for any of their systems? Nice, okay. We can work on that here after it. So what is a blockchain? Very simple 101. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a really, really powerful accounting tool. Nothing more. But when you think about accounting, and you think of the basis of human communication and writing, it started with a ledger. When we moved into the agrarian revolution, when we were moved from nomadic to farming, the first written communication was a ledger recording when to harvest the crops. And look at what happened after that, after we started talking to each other. Pretty exponential growth. And so what makes this ledger incredibly powerful is that anything that you write on it can't be changed. And beyond that, it's decentralized. And so a copy of the ledger is on every node in the network. And everything in the network agrees upon what goes onto the ledger. So what this means is you have a trust layer. You have a new tool that allows you to trust any data in a network. And so what do you do when you trust the data? You can automate. Big data gets really big. You can create things, smart contracts, programmable logic with this trusted data. And when you think about it, ledgers are everywhere, from your grocery list to conversations that you have with people. And so to illustrate this, I'll go with a really simple example. And this is very linear thinking. This is where we are rooted in today. Let's say Alice buys a part from Bob, this car part. And as the standard thing goes, and I'm sure we've all experienced miscommunication, she says, Bob, calls him up, never received this part. Bob's like, well, our records say that it was delivered. She's like, but I don't have it here. And Bob's like, well, again, our record says I talked to a delivery person, everything was dropped off. And again, no, you didn't. Yes, you did. We ultimately get to prove it, right? How do you prove it? So in the world today, what are you going to do? We're going to look at records. We're going to talk to people. Maybe you'll hire a private investigator if the shipment was expensive enough. Some millions of dollars of routers. Who knows? But the thing is, in the blockchain-connected future, in the future where we can imagine this is recorded on a ledger, of course, every record of these parts and the shipments and the purchase orders would be recorded on a ledger that not just these two parties have access to, but multi-parties do, everyone along the supply chain. But this isn't exponential tech. That's not what I'm here to talk about, is making our supply chains more efficient. Because beyond that, and what we learned a lot about yesterday, was when we start combining things like sensors or additive manufacturing and 3D printing, that this part won't even be shipped from place to place. What's getting sent from place to place is a design file. And Alice is just creating this right on the spot. And in the blockchain-connected future, what do we need? We need to protect those files. How do we expect to be sending them all over the place? Through email? What if you've innovated, spent millions of dollars on that file? Do you really trust that going over those waves? And so, we can really start to think how this is going to evolve. So how does blockchain affect the world today? So if you remember the operating system of the present, that it's centralized and opaque, siloed, reactive, and regulated, we move to a decentralized landscape, and what that unlocks or enables is a more transparent, connected, proactive, and self-enforcing system. And it starts to look almost organic in nature. This is sort of how our living ecosystems operate. And so, as you imagine, when we look at the data silos and the company silos, and we put this trust layer on top, what it unlocks is entirely new possibilities, business models, ecosystems with this interoperability. No more point-to-point integrations. And this is a totally new way of thinking of things. This is, instead of looking at a blockchain like we looked at Google Maps like a map, it's a protocol or a tool that not just unlocks location data, but imagine this if we're unlocking the CAD files to what we're printing. We're unlocking identity, we're unlocking our finances, we're unlocking new ways of governance. So if you think of what happened in just 10 years with a map, imagine what can happen in just 10 years with access, this unprecedented access to exponential data. And so we'll go through a few examples. Supply chain is obviously the most real time today. It's going to impact you now, and it is impacting you now. So of course we have more sensors, we have increased data, we're tracking temperature of things as they move through your facilities, through the supply chain, and that's getting recorded on a blockchain. IBM has a food trust platform, and they created it to combat food recalls for lettuce and for mangoes. And so before they implemented a blockchain system, it took 7 days to track down the source and where a product ended up in the case of a recall. With a blockchain, it took 6 seconds. And we've seen this, and my company is working in the pharmaceutical industry as well to combat counterfeit pharmaceutical drugs. And we've also worked with automotive companies for auto parts. Also, on the corporate social responsibility side, companies like Levi's and Unilever are coming together to eliminate the need for third-party audits for the suppliers and actually self-certify your processes and put them directly in a blockchain. And so you have reputation data going on this that you can take with you from customer to customer. But again, this isn't really the exponential crazy things that we see in the same way that we couldn't have fathomed Uber coming out of a map. So this is where I get to how blockchain is going to help usher this transformation from what we think of right now as globally connected supply chain networks that are vast and complex and riddled with these trust gaps to demand chain. And again, we've heard a lot of this through our talks yesterday. 3D printing things on demand, as needed, just in time, hyper-localized. But there's a software component that's needed, and this is where the blockchain comes in, or a system like it, where it's managing not just IP or the exchange of value, but also managing economic incentives and micropayments, so the machines themselves can pay for the use of the file. So an example here is in aerospace. GE has been working on a blockchain-based system that integrates their machines to 3D print replacement parts on the site of the airport. And so where the blockchain comes in is that their design files are hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D for the data, not just the design, but it's really the metadata. It's all the instructions for the machine that tells you how to produce the part in just the right way. And that's very expensive information. That's not going in some cloud database. You're not sending that around on email. And so what they've done is created a system where all of that information is still protected in their own databases, but anytime a machine needs to utilize it and create a part, it'll ping the network and it unlocks the file for just a moment. Textiles. So again, I mentioned Levi's. I mentioned the corporate social responsibility and the auditing, where factory workers are actually, self-reporting and then connecting directly with consumers, and they're able to charge a premium for that. In the textile space, so this is a very fun project. In East Africa, I worked with a company called Skills to Earn, and they're training folks there to learn garment manufacturing and 3D knitting. Now, a lot of people were very frustrated with the impact of American imports into East Africa, of dumping kind of all of the clothing there. But the thing is, the local community still had interest in international brands. And so what we worked on was a project where we put the facilities, like a micro facility, and this was run by just 2 people, 3D knitter, and connected to a network where Calvin Klein's design files were hosted. And so people could buy what was a Calvin Klein t-shirt that was produced locally on demand. And beyond that, beyond just the excitement of producing it on demand, a fraction of that payment went back to the brand, a fraction of the payment stayed in the local community, which empowered and grew the local community, a fraction of the payment went back to the machine owner. So in this case, we can think of it as a distributed autonomous factory. Instead of one geographic location, you might own a fleet of machines that are globally distributed. And you're still getting money coming back. It's just not in the way that you think of it now. So that was an incredibly remarkable example of a system that both empowered a local community in a globalized context with globalized brands, and also still had the semblance of a traditional textile manufacturing operation. Agriculture. So I live in New York. Just outside of New York City, there is a company that is vertically farming lettuce and other greens called Bowery Farming. And they have something called Bowery OS. And obviously, this is a system that is collecting all of the data and managing the light and the nutrient cycles for the plants. And they're working with a blockchain-based system to put that data on for the purposes of research and also letting other people in smaller networks or operations tap into the network and utilize this information. So we can think of it, if you're familiar with an API or any other ways that we've exchanged data, it's similar, but you can monetize this because we had the internet of data, and now it's the internet of value. You can monetize everything. Automotive, I know this is a big industry here in Thailand. So I worked with BMW, and over the course of 2 years, we're sitting there and they're saying, we want to track our parts. I'm like, yeah, we can do that. You don't really need a blockchain. It's not an exciting use of a blockchain. But after 2 years of talking, I said, what is your biggest problem facing your company? And you know what they said? Any guesses? Tariffs. So for them, it ended up being cheaper to actually build a factory closer to where their distribution was than it was importing, in this case, into the United States. So we worked through a project where, again, we were creating a distributed network of autonomous, smaller modular factories that were closer to where the demand or distribution was. And again, all of the processes in these files, in the ways that the flow of value was on a blockchain network. And so while we're on the topic of automotive, we get into machine to machine, and this has real-time to-date value as well on the floor. So in the case of a car, we worked on a project to integrate blockchains with objects, devices, sensors, robots, and machines. And so this example was a very simple example of an autonomous vehicle and a charging port. And sure, that's a normal interaction, but what was exceptional about this is that with a blockchain, the car itself has a wallet, as does the charging port. So when it charges itself, it's actually making that payment directly to the charging port. And the next step here was that we were actually embedding radiant electricity in the ground so that any time that the car would stop at a stoplight, it would charge for just 3 seconds and make a payment for that 3 seconds. Now, that would not be possible today because the credit card processing fees would be absurd. You would never do that. But this is where you start to think of what you can do when you can enable micropayments like that. You have cars that are charging instantly. And so when you think of the machine-to-machine economy where we're further automating our systems, where we're creating maybe a completely autonomous factory or mobile factories that are communicating with each other and paying each other, this is helping us see where that might go. And so also drones. I mean, around the world, new buildings are being built with drone ports in their buildings. It's ridiculous. And what that represents to me is the further compression of production and consumption. And so the supply chain network is broad right now, but we're seeing manufacturers become distributors, manufacturers become retailers, and ultimately, do we even have these people in the middle? I don't know. But with the drones, it's coming straight from the source. And finally, to tie it up, we see not just autonomous and decentralized factories, but we see mobile autonomous decentralized factories. And so Amazon has started working on putting 3D printers and 3D knitters in the back of delivery trucks so that when you order something, let's say I order this, it's getting produced on the way to my door. Crazy, right? But it's happening. And so when we think of all of these things, what do they represent? Well, okay, the future is obviously becoming more increasingly personalized and on demand. It's simultaneously localized and globalized. It's a totally new paradigm. Because we're not just going back to the place where we were solely localized, and we're not just in this globalized mess where we're still trying to figure it out. We're moving back to hyper-localized in a globalized context. So with all of these things, though, we're becoming more sustainable and more abundant. It's better for ourselves, for sustainable businesses, and it's better for our planet. And so ultimately, what all of this represents is that the future is decentralized, and this is a value, it's not a technology. And that's just the beginning. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I could have gone on for hours today and bored you with more case studies on food production and smart cities and autonomous vehicles. And you have to remember, while blockchain and cryptography in theory has existed since the 60s, blockchain as we know it today was only proposed in 2009 through the Bitcoin system. But the thing is, the future, it's now. And I'll go to this very overused quote by Henry Ford. Before he created the Model T, people, if he asked people, what do you want? They would have said a better horse. In 2005, if you asked people, what do you want? They would have said a better map. And the thing is, he was able to create not just the Model T, an automobile, but he also ushered in with that the assembly line, a whole new way of doing things, of thinking, and of building products. And this changed the world. This ushered us into the Industrial Revolution. And you know what? He shortened the time it took to make a car from 12 hours to 93 minutes. Just like we're looking at how Bitcoin ushered in blockchain and it's shortening everything. And so we're at a unique moment in human history. This is not just an evolution in technology. This is an evolution in thought, in mindset, in the way that we think about doing things and running our businesses. And it's a shift that's going to not only create new business models and allow you to create new business models, but it's a shift that's going to allow you to unlock unbelievable economic value that far surpasses the trillions from the demand economy. And that future that we're building is now. And we've only just begun. Thank you.